they become more dense, there is more, there more competition. It's easier for natural enemies to get there. It's easier to transmit disease and so on. So while with density independence, whatever density is, mortality is similar. Here it goes up. Sometimes it can be inverse density dependence when higher populations actually have, oh, sorry, I'm not looking at the right thing. Part of density dependence also may be increase in mortality or decrease in fecundity or both. Okay. So this kind of density dependence has been observed for a bunch of other aphid species. So not surprisingly, we also detected density dependence here. So the same paper with Frank and Gary, this axis is rate of population growth. This axis is population density. It's a logarithmic scale, but it doesn't really matter. So you can see that there is considerable growth when populations are low, but as population density increases, like here, population growth decreases. Particularly obvious for green peach aphid, but you can see this trend everywhere. So dense populations basically don't grow very well, which can be due to a number of factors. One is this classic relationship between prey and predator. So, as prey populations goes up, there are lots of resources for predators, their population go up. And by doing that, they drive prey population down. But when prey is down, it's not so good for predators. So the populations also go down and release prey. So we have those cycles going on and on and on. And another density dependent kind of classical textbook ecology thing is, mostly competition. This is like carrying capacity of the environment. As number of organisms grow, the rate of growth slows down because there are few resources for them left until they hit certain level above which they cannot exist because they consume all the resources. So are those factors potentially responsible for what we observed with aphids? So again, with Frank, who is generally considerably smarter than I am and knows his statistics very well, put another manuscript together using the so-called path analysis, advanced statistical analysis, which can look at the effects of those factors, including predators and parasitoids and disease on aphid population growth rate. Also, competition is a factor here. This was done on a somewhat shorter time series because we did not have data on predators, parasitoids, and diseases until Gary and Dick Storch started working here in 1972, but it's still a long-term data series. And what we did find as a result is that for buckthorn and green peach aphid, some of the weather parameters have a significant effect on their population growth. And for potato aphid and buckthorn aphid, predators and disease have effect. And for green peach aphid, also other aphids, presence of other aphids, which kind of presumably competition with those other aphids have a impact. Okay, so this is great, but what does it have to do with, what's going on kind of in the real life. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. So if we have some, if we see something on paper, what does it mean in real life? Well, for weather, we just looked at what was weather changes in Aroostook County over that time period. And not surprisingly, there is a trend in warmer towards warmer temperatures. This is like mean daily August temperature, which was used as a proxy for temperature in general. But there is a general trend towards warmer and somewhat drier, to less degree, but somewhat drier weather. Trend is there, but we still have that north continental climate, and aphids certainly can live in areas which are much hotter and much drier than it is here. So while it may have had some effect, it was probably not the main driver for basically collapse in populations of buckthorn and green peach aphid on those potatoes. So another factor we looked at are predators, and these are 3 lady beetle species which are not native to North America. Coccinella septempunctata, Harmonia axyridis, which is known to everybody probably by now, and then Propylea quaternodecimpunctata. And these are the 2 native species which used to be dominant, Hypodermia tridecimpunctata and Coccinella transversa guttata. Okay, so if we looked at the old data, which was published by Shands, way before my time, and the same location on Aroostook Research Farm, communities of lady beetles were dominated by those 2 native species, Hypodermia tridecimpunctata and Coccinella transversa guttata. But then starting 70s, situation became different. Coccinella septempunctata was deliberately released. You can see it here. To enhance aphid control. Okay, and it was released, then it disappeared for a while, and this lag period is not unusual for invasive species. Probably they have to go through some like evolutionary changes, so the genotypes which are better adapted to local conditions increase in frequency in the populations. But then starting 80s, Coccinella septempunctata, 7-spotted ladybug, took over like a wildfire and basically squeezed out 2 native species. Okay, and then in the mid-90s, other 2 species are appearing. Propylea quaternodecimpunctata, which probably arrived on its own, and then Harmonia axyridis, which was deliberately released all over the country, but I guess the current thinking is that all those releases failed, and it the huge outbreak that happened after that happened because of one inadvertent introduction in Louisiana. Apparently some genetic evidence points on that. Quite honestly, it's hard for me to believe, but the bottom line is that now we have a totally different community in potatoes in Aroostook County, which is more diverse, but those native species are found only at small densities, with Coccinella transversa guttata pretty much disappearing. I mean, didn't go extinct, but it's hard to find. Okay, overall abundance of lady beetles did not change much. You know, there was this one big spike, but probably some kind of a fluke. In general, it stayed pretty flat, but their composition did change. And this is the aphid data again. So you can see that around mid-90s, this is when aphid populations collapse. All right. So again, some statistics. We ran statistical analysis and could see that Harmonia axyridis has significant negative effect on population of aphids, while the two native species have, positive effect, which significant for epidemia, but it's not, it's not that they take care of aphids and aphids grow better. It's just back in the good old times when this one was more abundant, they were more aphids. But this is probably what it says it is, and Harmonia axyridis has a significant negative effect. So then we ran some lab studies, some follow-up lab studies with graduate and undergraduate students. And if you look at consumption of 4 aphid species by Harmonia axyridis, it consumes more aphids compared to other species, whether native or non-native. The same goes to potato aphid, and the same goes to rose aphid. We didn't do it to buckthorn aphid because literally they were hard to find. Lupin aphid, there was no effect because lupin aphid sequesters toxins from lupins, and as a result, it's not edible to lady beetles, even to Harmonia axyridis. Although interestingly, native species would consume at least some of them. So this Harmonia axyridis not only is there like temporal coincidence between its appearance and aphid collapse, but it's also in the lab, we confirmed that it's a more voracious species. So competition, we studied competition among aphids. Remember, there was that path analysis picked up that they may be at least green peach aphid is negatively affected by competitors. So we used again those lab arenas to test that. And we had treatments, either released 3 aphids of each species or 3 aphids of the same species, 9 aphids of the same species on those cut leaves. And then we measured their survivorship, and buckthorn aphid had the shortest life expectancy, green peach aphid the longest, and potato aphid is in the middle when held separately. But when they were held together, there was no difference between potato and green peach aphid. So competition among green peach aphids seems to be less ferocious than competition between green peach and potato aphids, and potato aphids gain upper hand in that competition. And then the reproductive output kind of shows the same. A buckthorn aphid produces fewest offspring, green peach aphid the most, and potato aphid is in between. But if you put them together, then potato aphid starts doing much better than when it competes with other potato aphids. So competing with buckthorn and green peach aphids is better for them. But buckthorn aphid is not doing well at all. Compare this one to this one. All right, but what does it mean in the field? So, if we stick them in a petri dish, things are going to be different. So, if we stick a polar bear with a penguin in the same cage, polar bear would probably eat a penguin, but it doesn't mean that in nature polar bears have any impact on penguin populations. So we again looked at scouting data from untreated potato plots 1996 through 2002, looked at leaflets on which those aphids were counted, and only 4 leaflets out of almost 5,000 had all 3 species present, and less than 4% had 2 species present. So they somehow partition plants in nature. And then we also looked at temporal dynamics, and this is another paper with Bob and Pat. And there is also some temporal separation with potato aphids peaking earlier than the other 2 species. So while there is definitely competition, they seem to be able to at least partially avoid it in nature. Okay, so we looked at another parameter, aphid mobility, in those large arenas, which sort of simulated a section of potato field. So we would release aphids either 90 centimeters or 180 centimeters away from potatoes on bare soil, and then watch them colonizing potato plants. And potato aphids were the best ones in colonizing plants, even like 180 centimeters away. Green peach aphids could do it, but not as well, and buckthorn aphids didn't make it. And then if we released it in a less kind of aggressive environment in between 2 potato plants, then all of them marched to nearest plants. No aphids moved between the rows. Okay, and again, buckthorn aphid, fewest of them made it to plants, and potato aphids were the most mobile. Green peach aphid was in between. So perhaps this high mobility gives potato aphids better survivorship in the presence of more aggressive predators such as Harmonia axyridis. So if aphids smell or see, probably smell, Harmonia axyridis, or more likely they don't even smell Harmonia axyridis, they smell alarm pheromone that's released by other aphids that are being attacked, it would drop down, but then it would fairly easily climb back onto plants, while other species, especially buckthorn aphid, are not as good in doing that. Okay, so kind of pieces fit together, and interestingly, there is also, correspondence between data from analysis, long-term analysis of field data and looking at different factors, and our lab results. But then, of course, maybe we're over-analyzing it. This is Occam's razor, which basically tells us that the best and the most likely correct explanation is the simplest one. So potato acreage did decrease significantly over the years for a number of reasons. Could it have effect on this aphid abundance? Maybe, But I kind of doubt it, because first of all species have, like, as I said, several hundred different host plants. So these potatoes were not replaced by parking lots. They were replaced by other vegetation. So some of that may not have been suitable if, forest grew back, or if it was converted into like suburban dwellings or whatnot, although Aroostook County is not exactly a very urbanized area, but Aroostook Research Farm is kind of on the outskirts of town. So it may have contributed it, but probably not to a large degree. Also decline from 70s to 2010s and present day was kind of gradual, while collapse in aphid populations happened around here. And before that, it was maybe declining to some degree, but more or less bouncing around. So maybe a contributing factor, but I don't think it was a major driver. If you run correlation analysis, yeah, there is a significant correlation between acres planted and number of aphids, and it's especially for these two species, not for potato aphid. But again, many things happened during that time period which were not necessarily related to potato acreage, such as introduction of new predators. Or another thing that happened is that broad spectrum insecticides, which were used to control aphids and other insects, and which were highly toxic to pretty much everything, including natural enemies such as lady beetles that I talked about already, and green lacewings, and parasitoid wasps, and so on. They were gradually replaced by milder, more environmentally friendly, and more specific insecticides. So this is just an example. What we are doing in experimental plots sometimes is that we would spray this old-fashioned broad-spectrum pyrethroid insecticide. Basically, we spray for natural enemies. Natural enemies die out. We have outbreak of aphids following that, because there are no natural enemies to control them, and aphid bounce back quickly because they produce lots of babies and have very short generation time. So this is significantly more aphids on treated plot compared to untreated plot that still has natural enemies, and by far more aphids than with plots that were treated by neonicotinoid insecticides, which are applied on tubers. So they are not sitting on surface of plants, they are inside plants. So lady beetles are less exposed to them. Now, they are also translocated into like nectar and pollen, so they can be effect. Certainly, it is a big concern for bees and other pollinators, but for lady beetles, not so much. So as growers switched from using something like this, or even worse, to something like this, they just became fewer aphids, interestingly enough, by using something that's less toxic and more precise. Results are much better than using this, highly toxic broad spectrum chemical. So, in conclusion, there is dramatic decline in populations of buckthorn aphid and green page aphid, less so potato aphid. The decline is coincident with changing climate and establishment of voracious non-native predators. The most affected species, buckthorn aphid, is outcompeted by other two species and laboratory microcosms, but I don't know what it means. It probably doesn't help to its survival in the wild, but I presume that the same competition was going on in the past as well. And during the same time span, there were considerable reductions in potato acreage and use of broad spectrum pesticides. So, in other words, all three major anthropogenic forces, climate change, biological invasions, and landscape alteration, may be at play here. When you go to Aroostook County, sometimes you think, oh my God, it's like time stops here. Not much is happening, not much is going on. However, that's obviously not true, at least not when you are a buckthorn aphid or you are a green peach aphid. In this case, you are affected by these global change processes and also not positively affected. So just being in that neck of the woods does not mean that the same things that are going on globally would not arrive over there. So this is pretty much everything that I had to say, and I will be happy to entertain questions if you have them. I presume you can send me a text on chat, or you can ask it like over a microphone.
Thanks, Andrei. That was very interesting. So yeah, we're a small group. So if folks want to unmute and fire some questions at Andrei, go ahead. Otherwise, I tried to send a chat to bring the chat box up for everybody, so you can also put your questions in text. So does anybody have any questions?
Is this study still going on?
Not really. We don't have, in many years, we do not have enough aphids to do meaningful study like on insecticides. So we do not have this, we have some data, but it's not as good as it used to be because, if they're not there really, they had to study. I can say that there is definitely no rebound, but we do not have like annual counts that we used to have.
Hey, Andrei, this is Kathy. That was really, really cool. I think kudos to you for recognizing the value of what you had in that little closet, file cabinet, and such a unique environment. It seems like with, potatoes being the primary crop up there and an isolated area. But I have a question about migration. And do some of those aphids, could they be brought in by storm fronts from the south or any of those kinds of things that could also be affected by climate change? Yeah.
Yes, this is possible. You mean that there are less storm fronts coming through from the south? That's an excellent point. There are different opinions on how many of them actually overwinter in the area as opposed to arrive from other areas. And there is also, in addition to storm fronts, there is a considerable movement of like greenhouse stuff and such, which may come fairly, for like spring planting and so on. So it may be a factor, in general. I would imagine that there are more storms now than they used to be, again, because, this is what climate models predict. So I don't think there was like, 20-fold decrease in those extreme weather events affecting it. And in part, that would also be counteracted by more plant movement to greenhouses. They have Lowe's there, they have Home Depot and all that stuff. And also by higher survival of local populations because of somewhat milder winters, although not every winter. So maybe, but I would not attribute that probably just to this. Okay, so it's not a question, it's a comment. So you're very welcome. And yeah, it says, thanks so much, Andrei. Interesting presentation in light of recent highly publicized accounts of the insect apocalypse. Yeah, I mean, we sort of see the same trends. I did upload this data set to a museum site in England that curates those long-term data sets. So hopefully other people can use it also for other studies. Again, I don't particularly like sensationalism, like insect apocalypse. Oh my God, we're all going to die. Because even like out of the 3 recent studies, one was somewhat apocalyptic, but the other 2 were not. However, it doesn't mean that we should not take it seriously, and people don't miss pest aphids much, but you don't know what kind of cascade of effects it may cause. Okay, another message in the chat. Very understandable talk, Andrei. Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, does
Andrei.
anybody-
Yep.
I have a question for you, Andrei.
Yep.
Do you think that there could be any effect, bottom-up effects from the plant, either fertility, changes in fertility, or obviously cultivars changing over that long period?
Cultivars were actually very consistent. There was one switch from Katahdin to Atlantic, like in 90s for a relatively short period of time. Then it came back. So fertility may be, but I would actually expect modern techniques to be more conducive for aphid outbreaks, because people rely more on synthetic fertilizers and use less organics. So like in the 50s, 60s, using manure, probably mostly manure, but maybe some compost, like animal bedding, chicken bedding, like from chicken farms, would be more common than now. Now it's all synthetic, which has been shown to actually favor aphids, particularly nitrogen.
Wow.
But that's a great question. That's something to think about, but I don't think so. I would actually, again, as I said, imagine that modern techniques, unfortunately, would be more favorable for aphids.
Yeah, and do you think potatoes are a pretty difficult host plant for many aphids? Because you certainly don't get any substitutions. You don't get other species moving in to replace the decline of those 3 major species.
No, because worldwide there are maybe like around 10 of aphid species that were recorded from potatoes. Viands have high concentration of glycoalkaloids, cardiac glucosides, so they're pretty toxic, including to many insect species.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for this summary. It was great. Enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much. Very big part of that is your work, actually.
Although I beg to
thank you.
I beg to differ that I think most people now, it may have changed, but most people now say that you are much, much smarter than I am. So things have flip-flopped. It's like with the aphids.
Well, thank you, Frank. Now I'm particularly looking forward to my retirement.
It's good to see some friendly banter on there. Does anybody
Hey,
else
Andrei,
have
can
any?
I ask one more question?
Oops, go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, okay. You probably kind of suggested it, and maybe I wasn't quite following it, but you talked about predator-prey relationships and how that really could be cyclical, and that two of the species were showing declines in cyclical response, correct?
Yep.
Like the cyclical nature, but one of them wasn't. Is there
Well,
anything
yeah, they were just basically smacked so hard that there is not much left to fluctuate.
Oh, all right.
So they are, I mean, they're kind of hanging on there, but they don't seem to be able to produce a meaningful outbreak. So I don't think I mean, they may be still cycling going on, but the amplitude is so small that, with our, relatively infrequent, they were usually this is aphids were counted once a week on either 20 or 25 plants per plot, 3 leaves per plot, 1 top, 1 middle, 1 bottom. So this is probably, we don't get enough of a resolution to detect fluctuations at like low amplitude. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Does my explanation make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Andrei, I was curious whether or not you've through the literature, have you noticed any similar changes in some of the polyphagous species like green peach aphid? Are there similar trends on other crops, or have you read anything about that? Or is this
No, I don't
really
think I don't think people have such good data sets as we do, quite honestly. That, if it wasn't for, Dick and Gary, and before them, Shands and Simpson, we wouldn't have had it. The only other like good data set is from Rothamsted survey in England, but they use like suction traps. Basically, they just suck everything from the air that flies over those open pipes. And I haven't read anything like that from them. Actually, I haven't read anything coming out of there. I'm not even sure if they're still doing it or not, although they probably do. The thing with that, however, they have like, I don't know, maybe 30 different species, 40 different species caught, but captures of an individual species are relatively low. So, I mean, they did in the past, like in the 90s, studies on like cycles, and they detected density dependence. But sometimes I wonder, is it a good cycle between like 3 and 7 or not? So, I mean, it may be cyclical, but, it may also be, yeah. So
Just
basically, the sample size for many of these species may not be sufficient to get too excited about that. So, but yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and we don't know. Hopefully, now that, people are trying to curate those data sets and deposit them at like several central locations, maybe we can get more information specifically on aphids. In general, I heard that global change is supposed to favor aphids, but for a number of reasons. But it's hard to tell, quite honestly. Okay, so there is a text from Bob. Thanks so much, Andrei. Learned a lot. Maybe in retirement we can come to the mass annual meetings. I'll try. I'd also wondered about other aphids, but good to know only 10 species worldwide have been associated with potatoes. We grew our first crops this year in the garden and may will increase next year. They've been outstanding. Take care, Bob. Well, good luck with your potatoes, Bob. It's a great crop to grow. Beware of the Colorado potato beetles, though. It's probably a more formidable pest for you than aphids.
All right, well, we've reached 8 o'clock and past it, so I'll put out a one last call for any more questions for Andrei. All right, I don't see any mics opening, so thanks again, Andrei, for visiting with us and sharing your research. That was great. Appreciate it. And then thanks everybody else for joining. We'll be back again next month, December 9th at 7 p.m. We'll be hearing from Wesley Hutchins about some of his monarch research. So I think we have yet to send out advertisements for that. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, thanks again, everybody, for joining in, and have a wonderful night. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And